What if Thanksgiving, the day that's supposed to feel like coming home, starts with a house that's freezing pitch dark and a note sitting on the counter that reads, "We went on a cruise." You handle him. No explanation, no phone call. Just a cold, careless handoff, leaving a dying stepfather shivering in the dark like his life is nothing more than an inconvenient chore they didn't want to deal with. People like to say how you treat the vulnerable is who you really are. So when the cruelty comes from inside your own family, when comfort matters more to them than a human life, do you stay quiet to keep the peace? Or do you stand up and make them pay for what they've done? Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always amazing to see where our stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next twist in this journey. Now, let's listen to him from the heart. The morning of my mother's funeral began in a way that didn't feel like grief. It felt like a test I had prepared for my whole life. It was early, just past 6. The sky was bruised gray clouds hanging thick over Lake Michigan, and the wind coming off the water had that unmistakable Chicago bite that sank right through the seams of your coat. I sat on the edge of the bed in the room I'd grown up in inside the Winnetka house my family still called home, though it hadn't felt like mine in over a decade. The walls were the same pale blue. The desk still had my childhood initials carved into the side. But everything else, everything real, had long been stripped from it. This house remembered me only the way my family did, vaguely, with distance, and as someone less than I really was. I took a breath and stood up slowly. My black funeral suit waited for me, laid out with care. No logo, no flair. Simple lines, minimal silhouette. To anyone else, it probably looked like something off a department store rack. A generic suit for a son who'd amounted to nothing special. But that suit, crafted by hand, one of one, was worth $30,000. Bespoke from the shoulders to the hem. Rare wool-silk blend from an independent mill in northern Italy. The kind of inner canvassing and hand-stitching only a trained eye would ever notice. Not that anyone here would. That was the point. I didn't wear it to show off. I wore it to remind myself of a truth I already knew: my family had never bothered to look beneath the surface. They hadn't earned the right to know who I really was. In keeping with the disguise, I'd also left my car, a quiet, high-performance electric model, tucked in my building's downtown garage, and taken my old '98 Camry instead. It still ran barely. The muffler rattled like a tin cup. But in a place like this, that only added to the illusion. Gideon Calder, the family failure, the tailor's son who clung to his mother's dusty little shop like a barnacle on a sinking ship. I played the part well, soft-spoken, stayed out of the way, no arguments, no explanations. I let them see what they wanted to see. It didn't hurt anymore, not like it used to. Not when I was 16 and overheard my father say I lacked direction, or when Gage once laughed in front of his MBA friends about my needle and thread dreams. No, these days it was just clear. They hadn't ever asked about my life. Not really. They didn't want to understand. They preferred the story they'd written about me in their heads, and I'd let them keep it. Outside the window, I could see the driveway filling up black sedans and polished shoes clicking over the gravel. The performance was beginning. I picked up my cufflinks. They were mother of pearl, my mother's favorite detail. Just as I fastened the second one, my phone buzzed. Maris Vale, my right hand, my confidant, my enforcer when I needed her to be. Final termination file for Sailor is ready. Last signature secured, in line with brand ethics clause. I didn't reply, just stared at the screen for a second. Right on cue. I slipped the phone into my pocket, rolled my shoulders back, and looked at myself once more in the mirror. A man in mourning. A man carrying more than grief. Then I turned, walked down the stairs, and headed into the day my mother would be buried and my family, one by one, would begin to realize how blind they'd been. The chapel in Lincoln Park was all glass and light and silence, one of those sleek modern places that tried to evoke grace through minimalism. It was elegant, cold, calculated. Exactly the kind of place my mother would have hated. She preferred warmth, soft light, jazz over string quartets, quiet strength over grandiosity. But none of that was present here. No today was about appearances. Every detail of the funeral screamed curated grief, cascading white orchids, a live quartet playing some muted classical arrangement, perfectly timed eulogies. It wasn't a service, it was a spectacle. My father stood at the front like a monument to loss, receiving handshakes and half embraces with the practiced solemnity of a man who knew how to perform pain. My brother Gage hovered nearby, dressed in a fitted navy suit and patent leather shoes, constantly checking his phone. Not enough to seem rude, just enough to betray that something was eating at him. And then there was Sailor. If grief was a brand, she had turned it into a capsule collection. Her black dress was cut to perfection, high fashion but mourning chic. A halo of carefully curated acquaintances followed her, from pew to pew, industry contacts, beauty influencers, her current media manager. It was a funeral, and yet she glowed like she was arriving at a red carpet benefit. I sat 2 rows back, alone, letting the moments blur, letting the shallow condolences come and go. "How's the little shop holding up?" one family friend asked me gently. "I'm managing," I said like I always did. "You ever think about doing something more stable?" another added. "Men don't usually last long in that kind of work. You're not still tailoring full-time, are you?" I smiled. "I'm still at it." They nodded with a pitying kindness, like I was a child clinging to a toy long after it had broken. I kept my voice even. I didn't flinch. And then a moment. I was reaching to shake hands with someone when a woman, older, elegant, with silver hair and sharp eyes, stepped close to offer her condolences. I recognized her vaguely as someone from my mother's past, perhaps a former client or colleague in the fashion world. She embraced me briefly, then paused. Her fingers touched the lapel of my jacket barely. A shift in her expression. Her gaze dropped, studying the texture, her brow furrowed, then smoothed. "This suit," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "This isn't ordinary." I met her eyes. Calm. Steady. "My mother taught me to recognize things of real value," I said. She didn't nod, didn't smile. Just held my gaze for a heartbeat longer than necessary, then moved on. And with that, the first thread began to tug loose. A stranger had seen what my family never bothered to. Nearby, Sailor was gathering her circle again, speaking just loud enough to ensure she was heard. She talked about upcoming campaigns, teased a possible beauty line collaboration, hinted at brand partnerships that would honor Mom's legacy. She mentioned nothing about grief, nothing about the woman who raised us. It wasn't mourning, it was marketing. I kept my distance, listening, not engaging, memorizing everything. Then from the corner of my eye, a shift in Gage's posture. His phone rang. He turned, stepped away, took the call. I watched his expression darken. He spoke in clipped tones, then quickly hung up when he caught me watching. My father, meanwhile, was beginning to unravel. He spoke to the funeral director, then a cousin, then an estate attorney, quietly but urgently. The words I overheard weren't about her memory. They were about logistics, assets, transfers, real estate. My mother's body hadn't even left the chapel, and already they were rearranging the pieces. I sat back and let the truth settle into my chest. They weren't just blind to me. They were blind to everything, including what was already unfolding behind their backs. Duai jai la noidong huan chin kua chuang bava chuang bon viet bang tieng an. Mai tun hien lien much voi he chuang truok jam bao phong kach ke chuen sausak gyo kam ksuswa jung logic noidong theo outline ban kung cap. The reception room smelled faintly of lilac and brewed coffee, a desperate attempt to soften the sterility of grief. Glass clinked. Conversations buzzed, polite and polished. I stood near the far wall, half shielded by a tall arrangement of white lilies, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. I wasn't trying to be invisible. I just wasn't going to perform for them. That didn't stop Sailor from dragging me into the spotlight. She found the moment a lull in conversation, just enough people nearby for her words to ripple through the room like a dropped stone in still water. She took one step forward, her voice coated in syrupy pity loud enough to travel. "Seriously, Gideon, you wore that to Mom's funeral." Every head turned. A few eyebrows raised. Most looked away, pretending they hadn't heard. Then she added with a tilt of her head and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "You really are the family failure, huh?" A few soft laughs, some awkward shifting of feet, but no one said a word to stop her. She kept going. God, if Mom could see you now, scruffy, clinging to that sad little shop like it means something. You make her look pathetic. I felt every word like a pebble being dropped into a dry well, but I didn't flinch. Then Gage stepped in, not to diffuse the situation, but to pile on his tone, smug and brotherly. Look, man, if money's tight, I'll spot you for a decent suit. Doesn't have to be bespoke or anything, just not whatever that is. He chuckled as if we were sharing some inside joke. Then his voice dropped low enough to pretend it was just for me. You should really think about closing that shop. Time to get a real job. Or at least something with benefits. And then Harlan, never one to miss the chance to re-establish control, placed the final nail like a man delivering a eulogy. Your mother's store was a charming distraction, he said, swirling his whiskey. But you're 30 now. It's not a legacy, it's a hobby. I looked at them, my siblings, my father, and I said nothing. Not because I was beaten, but because I'd already won. They didn't want the truth. They wanted a character, a cautionary tale. The disappointing son clinging to a dead woman's dream. I let them talk. I watched them cement their roles in front of everyone else's roles that would soon collapse under their own weight. Just then my phone buzzed. A message from Maris. Termination letter has been signed and queued. Scheduled to release at 6 a.m. tomorrow. PR has the rebrand draft ready. Sailor Oblivious was gloating now. She gestured grandly as she spoke about her next campaign, how she'd just signed with a luxury skincare brand and had meetings lined up in LA. I took a sip of coffee and lifted my cup toward her, offering a single sentence that would land very differently in a matter of hours. Here's to your new direction. She grinned, thought I meant it. Everyone around her nodded, validating her fantasy. But tomorrow when the press release hit, she'd realize new direction meant the door. Meanwhile, Harlan was talking loudly to one of his cousins. I caught a sliver of conversation. The shop's just sitting there. Might be time to sell it. Use the space for something practical. Maybe a cafe. My jaw didn't tighten. My hands didn't shake. I just listened. They weren't just dismissing me. They were ready to carve up the last thing my mother loved to save themselves. And they had no idea they were too late. I slipped outside before the last toasts and condolences. The air bit colder now, wind curling under my collar. The streets of Chicago were slick with yesterday's rain glowing under the low-hanging sky. As I walked alone down the sidewalk, I said only this to myself: I didn't come here to ruin them at Mom's funeral. I just decided from this moment forward I won't shield them from the consequences they've earned, and tomorrow the first of those consequences would arrive. The morning after the funeral was sharp and silver. Sunlight glanced off the wet pavement and the wind smelled like snow was thinking about arriving early. I parked my old sedan on North Clark Street and stepped out in front of the shop. To anyone passing by, it was just another old storefront wedged between a laundromat and a dusty second-hand bookstore. The faded gold lettering on the windows still read, Calder Atelier, though the sea was peeling. Inside, it looked exactly how the world assumed it should. A few mannequins, a sewing table, a vintage register that barely worked, thread spools arranged just so, every detail perfectly curated to say small, struggling, sentimental. But that was the point. The real story started behind the curtain. I walked through the shop, slowly brushing my fingers against the edge of a display case my mother once used for cufflinks. I could almost hear her humming Debussy, probably as she measured fabric or adjusted a lapel. And then I pushed through the backroom door and walked straight to the far wall. A touch to the right seam. A retinal scan. A quiet hiss. The hidden door slid open with a low mechanical click. I stepped into the real world. Down the narrow stairs lay a cavernous space, clean, precise, humming with quiet electricity. Bolts of rare textiles lined the walls. Drafting tables stretched beneath sleek lamps. Monitors displayed data streams, logistics, production, brand metrics. This was my atelier. This was the nerve center of a fashion empire that no one, not Harlan, not Gage, not even Sailor, had ever suspected. Because I'd made sure they never looked past the window. I sat at my workstation and opened the latest report from Maris. Gage, the firm, was under audit. Rumors of financial misconduct were growing. His personal accounts were leveraged into the red. Harlan lenders were circling. Several properties tied up in speculative investments were now subject to recall. The stopgaps he relied on had vanished. Sailor, the termination letter, had been delivered. Her brand deals were in limbo. The image overhaul campaign was live. No coming back. It wasn't vengeance. It was gravity. The natural result of choices compounding. I had simply stepped back and let the weight drop. And I wasn't finished. I moved toward the rear of the atelier and approached a glass cabinet. Inside, on a velvet-lined shelf, sat my mother's old sewing machine. I hadn't touched it since she passed. I didn't need to. Its presence was enough. Like a sentinel, like a promise. Then another ping from Maris. Harlan is calling investors. He's using your name vaguely. Gage is sniffing around for the mystery CEO behind the Atelier Collective. Sailor just texted from an unlisted number. Please pick up. I need to talk. I didn't answer. For the first time, they were chasing ghosts, and for once I had no intention of turning around. I walked back to the center of the space and stood quietly in the pool of light cast by the skylight overhead. Outside, no one knew this place even existed. To the world, I was still just the son with the suit that didn't quite fit. But in here, I was something else entirely. I looked back at the sewing machine. They're about to come knocking, I murmured. And they had no idea what door they were trying to break down. By the next morning, my life split cleanly into two parallel tracks, and I ran them both without letting either one show strain. I unlocked my mother's shop at the usual hour, flipped the sign, and let the bell ring out into the quiet street. To anyone watching, it was just another workday. I pressed garments, took measurements, nodded to familiar faces. The register chimed the same tired sound my mother loved. I kept the surface intact because the surface was the shield. By noon, I was downstairs. Screens woke up with a soft hum, calendars stacked, numbers scrolled, calls lined up back-to-back across time zones. I moved through it all with the calm of someone counting steps, not minutes, approvals, forecasts, adjustments, expansion plans that had been waiting for this exact window to open. When momentum builds, you don't celebrate it. You steer it. At 6:02 a.m., the system flagged a receipt. Opened. Sailor had read the email. The reaction came fast and uneven, like a glass cracking under pressure. Payment terminals began rejecting her cards, first in a boutique, then at a hotel desk. Limits tightened, accounts paused. The noise she usually made online went dead quiet. No posts, no stories, no carefully staged grief or resilience. Silence, which for her was panic. She tried to reach people, her manager, her publicist. Then she changed direction and started hunting for the person she believed could undo it all, the owner. The one nobody ever saw. The one people spoke about in careful tones. She didn't know she was circling my building. Security pinged me mid-afternoon. A woman had arrived at one of our offices downtown, asking for an urgent meeting with the person in charge. She wore a hat pulled low and sunglasses that didn't belong indoors. Her posture was rigid. Her voice carried the brittle edge of someone who had never been told no. I watched the live feed. Sailor at the desk, hands clenched, demanding clarity she no longer controlled. When the receptionist explained there was no availability and no confirmation to offer, Sailor's composure thinned. She tried entitlement, then outrage, then negotiation. None of it worked. I instructed security to keep it professional. No confrontation, no acknowledgement. Let the absence speak. For the first time in her life, there was no hand beneath her elbow, no shortcut, no applause waiting on the other side of a door. While she unraveled, Gage tightened. Maris forwarded updates as they came in. Accounts under review, transactions flagged, a few frozen outright. Lawyers reaching out not with confidence but with questions. And beneath it all, something familiar and ugly, Gage probing for leverage. He tried to access records that didn't belong to him, ownership trails, corporate structures, anything that could be twisted into a bargaining chip. I didn't block him completely. I let him see just enough to convince himself there was something there to grab while every move logged, time-stamped, preserved. Desperation makes people sloppy. Late afternoon, the bell at the shop rang again. I looked up and saw my father standing in the doorway, shoulders squared the way they used to be when authority still came easily to him. He didn't sit right away. He paced, looked around like he was reassessing the value of the place, measuring it with new eyes. "I'm in a bit of a bind," Harlan said finally. The words tasted unfamiliar in his mouth. "Temporary. Cash flow issues." He named a number. Big enough to matter. Small enough he assumed to be impossible for me. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I shook my head once. "This place barely breaks even," I said. Mom left space, not money. He studied my face, searching for something he could push on, finding nothing. He left with his pride bruised and his need unmet anger simmering under the surface. Not long after, the woman from the chapel came in, the one who had noticed the suit. She apologized for not speaking up at the funeral. Then she said it plainly, without ceremony. She knew who I was. She'd seen a photograph once. Recognized the tailoring. Put it together. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she said. "I just thought you should know someone sees you. Your mother did too." After she left, my phone rang. Harlan again. This time no bluster. "We need to talk," he said. "Tonight. Family meeting." I agreed, but I set the time. When you control the clock, you control the tone. They thought they were preparing to sell my mother's legacy to save themselves. That night, they would learn exactly who they were dealing with. The house looked smaller than I remembered. I pulled into the driveway just after dark, the old Camry idling beneath lights that felt harsher than they used to. Inside, the air carried an echo, rooms too big for the things left in them. I noticed what was missing before I noticed what remained. Art taken down, shelves lighter, spaces where value had been quietly converted to liquidity, an empire hollowed from the inside. I stepped in like a guest. That was easier. They'd never treated me like family anyway. Harlan opened with familiar language, unity, legacy, standing together. Gage and Sailor followed with explanations that sounded different but meant the same thing. Circumstances, pressure, bad timing. They needed money. Then my father laid it out. Sell the shop, license my mother's name, liquidate whatever could be turned into cash. He spoke as if consensus were a formality. I listened. Then I placed a folder on the table. The documents were clean, legal, unemotional. My mother's will, her directives, ownership, authority. The room shifted. Harlan accused me of manipulation. Gage scanned for loopholes. Sailor stared at the pages like they were written in another language. I told them to verify it all. My mother had planned carefully. She had known who they were long before I did. I didn't tell them everything. Not yet. I let pieces slip instead. That Sailor's contract was already gone. That I knew about Gage's access attempts. That lenders had stopped answering Harlan's calls. They stopped talking. Then my phone rang. I answered it in front of them. Approved an international call, resolved a brand issue, confirmed a personnel decision. The language was precise, operational, real. When I ended the call, no one spoke for a long moment. "If you can do all that Harlan said," finally, his voice stripped of command, "then help us." Sailor cried. Gage watched me like I was a variable he hadn't calculated. I stood. "I will tell you who I am," I said. "But not to destroy you. So you can't keep lying to yourselves." And for the first time, they understood the ground beneath them was about to give way. The house was too quiet for how many people were in it. The hum of the air conditioning sounded louder than it should have. The old clock in the hallway ticked with a precision that felt deliberate, like it was counting down to something none of us could stop. I stayed seated slightly apart from them, not out of distance but intent. I hadn't come here to argue. I hadn't come to trade insults or reopen old wounds. I had come to end an illusion that had been allowed to survive for far too long. Harlan still tried to sit like the head of the table's shoulders, squared chin lifted, but his authority flickered. One moment it showed as anger, the next as desperation. Gage had stopped pretending he was calm. His knee bounced. His eyes darted, already calculating exits that no longer existed. Sailor sat rigid, arms wrapped around herself, stripped of the noise and confidence she'd worn like armor. She had lost the things that made her feel untouchable, and now she was grasping for something, anything that could keep her upright. I spoke without raising my voice. "I'm not here to punish anyone," I said. "I'm here to tell the truth." They waited, tense, braced for emotion. They didn't get it. I went through them the way I went through reports. "Harlan," I said, first turning my attention to my father, "you've refinanced this house twice in the last 4 years. You've taken out short-term loans against properties Mom never wanted leveraged. You've missed 2 interest deadlines, and you have 3 meetings scheduled with private lenders who specialize in people running out of options. You used Mom's name to secure at least one of those deals." His jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I shifted to Gage. "You tried accessing ownership records that aren't public. You've moved funds between accounts that don't match your reported income. You've explored offshore options, and you've been positioning information like it's a weapon, something you can trade if things get worse." Gage's face drained of color. "That's not. You don't need to explain," I said calmly. "I already know." Then Sailor. "You're in debt," I said. "Not the kind that shows on camera. The kind that stacks quietly while you assume the next campaign will erase it. Your contract was paused because of conduct clauses you ignored. And yesterday you tried to get FaceTime with the owner to make it go away." Her voice cracked. "You don't know that." "I do." Silence fell. Heavy. Undeniable. They stopped performing because they couldn't. Every mask depends on the audience believing it. I had just taken that away. I leaned back slightly, giving them room to breathe before I took the last step. "The suit you laughed at," I said, looking at Sailor, "was worth $30,000. Her head snapped up. "It wasn't bought to impress anyone. It was made. For me." I let that settle, then continued. "The company you modeled for the one you've been calling your big break belongs to me. Not a friend, not an investor. Me." Her mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. "And the email ending your contract," I added, "was signed before you mocked me at Mom's funeral." I didn't say it with satisfaction. I said it like a fact. I didn't call anyone to ruin you. I didn't step in to save you either. I let the consequences arrive on time. Sailor shook her head hard, like she could dislodge the reality. "That's not possible. You're doing this to hurt me. You're punishing me." I watched recognition creep in the replay of her own words, her laughter, the certainty she'd had when she thought I was beneath her. For the first time, those moments carried weight. Gage leaned forward, eyes sharp despite the fear. "How did you hide this? What's the structure? Can we manage the fallout?" That told me everything I needed to know about where his heart was. Harlan stood abruptly. "You lied to me," he said, anger flashing. "You made a fool out of this family." "I didn't lie," I replied. "You never asked." The room sagged under that truth. I didn't stop there. I placed my phone on the table and pulled up old records, messages, emails, timestamps. Not stories, evidence. I reminded them of the year I asked for a small loan to expand the shop. How they laughed, called it fantasy, told me to stop embarrassing myself. I reminded Gage of the period when he ran charges under the family name, then let the story turn until I was framed as irresponsible, reckless. I reminded Sailor of designs and ideas she'd taken, things Mom and I had talked through late at night, only to erase the origin once cameras appeared. I showed them conversations where I was labeled a burden, a failure, a problem that could be managed if ignored long enough. They had chosen not to see me. They had chosen cruelty because it was convenient. Eventually, Harlan exhaled and sank back into his chair. "Fine," he said quietly. "If you can do all this, then help us." There it was. No apology, no reckoning. Just need. I nodded once. I will, I said, but not the way you want. I laid out the terms. I would buy the house through an independent trust. Harlan could stay, but as a tenant. No authority, no leverage, full transparency. I would cover legal support for Gage, but only if he cooperated fully. No hiding, no maneuvering. Everything disclosed. Sailor would not return as a face of any brand. She would start at the bottom retail operations training. Paid fairly. Judged honestly. This isn't punishment, I said. It's reality. You don't get rescued from illusions without losing them. They sat in it. The shame, the fear, the truth. Before I left, I placed one more item on the table. There's something Mom left, I said. She wanted it opened when we were all together. We'll do that soon. I walked out before they could bargain. For the first time, they were alone with themselves. I didn't bring them back to the house. I brought them to the shop. Saturday morning, doors locked. The city moving on outside while we stayed inside the place. Everything had begun. This wasn't a courtroom. It wasn't a negotiation. It was confrontation without props. They arrived quieter. Harlan looked older. The posture of command had softened into something closer to exhaustion. Gage carried folders, real ones this time. Sailor wore no makeup worth mentioning, her clothes simple, unbranded. For once she looked like a person instead of a headline. I showed them the front first. The part they wanted to sell. The counters, the mirrors, the small patient space my mother had built with her hands. Then the back room. The notes. The patterns. The margins where she'd written reminders to herself about fit and care and listening. Then the door. I didn't dramatize it. I opened it and let them follow. The stairs, the light, the machines, the screens. I didn't list numbers. I told stories. How my mother taught me that real value holds shape under pressure. How structure matters more than shine. How ethics aren't branding, they're the seam that keeps everything together. Finally, I opened the envelope she'd left. Her words were simple, clear. She spoke about love measured in actions taken when no one was watching, about work as dignity, about family as responsibility, not entitlement. She left a small object inside. A single button from her wedding dress, worn smooth by time. This, I said, holding it up, is what holds things together. Not labels, not applause. I told them about the foundation I was building. The programs, the shop becoming a place of learning, not extraction. I told them their roles if they chose to accept them. And I told them the boundaries. I won't buy affection, I said. I won't protect manipulation. Cross these lines and the support ends. Harlan nodded slowly. You were right, he said at last. I didn't look. Gage said nothing. But he stayed. Sailor cried without defending herself. When they left, I stayed behind. I touched my mother's notebook, the button, the machine. I put the suit back on, not as armor, but as reminder. The most expensive thing I owned wasn't fabric. It was the truth they never wanted to see. And I would carry it forward quietly, honestly, exactly the way she taught me to. The funny thing about power is that most people think it looks loud. They think it's a watch, you flash a car, you rev a name, you drop at the right table. My family lived like that, chasing the shimmer, mistaking attention for respect, mistaking control for love. And for a long time I let them. Not because I was weak, but because I understood something they didn't. If you keep feeding an illusion, it grows teeth. It starts biting everyone in the room, including the ones who built it. When my mother died, I thought grief would be the hardest thing to carry home. I was wrong. The hardest thing was watching her life turned into a stage prop, flowers, too big speeches, too polished pain packaged into something appropriate for people with money. My mother wasn't like that. She believed in quiet excellence, in work done right, in kindness that doesn't need witnesses. That's why the suit mattered. Not because it was $30,000. Not because it proved I wasn't who they'd decided I was. It mattered because it exposed a rot that had nothing to do with fabric and everything to do with how easily people judge what they don't understand. They saw cheap because they wanted to see cheap. They needed me to be small so they could feel tall. And here's the part that's uncomfortable, the part I didn't fully understand. Until I stood alone in my mother's shop after they left. I didn't just break their illusion. I broke mine too. I used to believe that if I stayed quiet long enough, if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself without asking for credit, eventually they'd look up and see me. I used to believe love was something you could earn by enduring disrespect with grace. That's a lie a lot of families teach without ever saying out loud. It sounds noble. It sounds loyal. But it keeps the wrong people comfortable and it keeps the right people trapped. What changed wasn't my money. What changed was my threshold. I realized that boundaries aren't cruelty. They're clarity. They're the difference between helping someone grow and enabling them to rot. When I offered them terms, it wasn't revenge dressed up as righteousness. It was the only kind of help that actually has a chance of saving anyone, the kind that costs something. Because if the lesson is free, people treat it like a coupon. They use it once, feel better, and go right back to the behavior that broke them. My father didn't lose his home because I hated him. He lost the fantasy that he could weaponize family and call it leadership. My brother didn't face consequences because I wanted him to suffer. He faced them because hiding the truth would have poisoned everything my mother built. My sister didn't fall because I pushed her. She fell because she'd been living on a platform made of applause, and applause is a terrible foundation. And me, I didn't win. I didn't walk away glowing. I walked away tired. Grief doesn't evaporate when justice shows up. If anything, it sharpens. Because now you can finally admit what you've been carrying, not just loss, but loneliness. Not just betrayal, but the years you spent pretending it didn't hurt. But I also walked away lighter. When the lights went out and the doors finally closed, what stayed with me wasn't the suit, or the silence, or even the humiliation. It was the quiet question my mother's life leaves behind in the moments when no one is watching. Who do we choose to be toward family, toward strangers, toward ourselves? Maybe that's the real inheritance. We don't have to clap for cruelty, and we don't have to answer it with cruelty either. We can tell the truth with steady hands, and still keep our hearts open. Because dignity isn't a label. It's the way we carry responsibility, and the way we make room for someone to change. If this story stirred something in you, you're welcome here. Subscribe if you'd like to be part of a community that listens and shares without shouting. And if you want, leave a few lines in the comments where you're listening from, or a moment you've lived that felt like this. Thanks for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself, be gentle with the people you love, and I'll see you in the next story.